Hi, I'm Lydia Gillman, and welcome back to the Step into Purpose podcast. For this episode, I really wanted to share my own journey and my struggles with anxiety because I've suffered from some form of anxiety for most of my life. I was a really anxious, worried child. Growing up at school and even in my adulthood, I experienced a lot of anxiety. And to be fair, it was high functioning anxiety. Often I was doing a lot of things and I looked like I was coping really well on the outside. But inside, I struggled and I didn't feel enough and I didn't feel like I was doing it well enough. And perfectionism has been a really big piece of my journey. So people were often surprised when I said that I'd struggle with anxiety and that I didn't always feel like I was enough, that I struggled with low self-worth a lot of the time. And it didn't look like that at all. And really, so many of us are like this. We sort of have this kind of a mask, a facade, which is up looking like we're coping beautifully, but actually inside we're struggling a lot. And I really just thought it was important to share this struggle and this journey because I think so many of us experience in some form or another, especially at this time in the world, people are really struggling. And I think it's so important to share so people know that they're not alone in this and that there is a way out, because while I think I'll always have some form of anxiety in my life, it's really managed pretty well now. And I have a lot of tools in my tool belt and just in my daily life, which I do use, and that makes an enormous difference at regulating my nervous system, making me feel safe, and also helping me know that what I'm doing is enough. We can only ever do our best, and that is more than enough in this world. So thank you so much for joining me, and I hope this episode is helpful for you. So I grew up in the 1980s. I was born in the mid-70s, but really most of my formative years was really late 70s and the 1980s. And this was a time when emotional well-being and emotional regulation wasn't part of the conversation, especially for children. And I was a highly sensitive child, again, before the term was even coined, which was in the 1990s when that term came about. So again, it wasn't part of the conversation. And as a highly sensitive child, I really absorbed everyone's emotions, especially, my parents, those people around me. I really drunk in all their emotions and internalized all my struggles. I didn't really communicate them. I just internalized all of them. And I really was in the freeze state a lot. My nervous system, I realize now, was completely dysregulated, and I was really in freeze a lot. I'd worry about something and I'd feel my blood run cold and really be in that state quite often over little things. But to me, of course, they were big. And, this sort of set the stage for what was to come later in life, because I didn't really feel a sense of safety within myself. And just that constant dysregulation. I was worried that I was going to die in the night. I'd have to have my parents say to me, "See you in the morning." And if they didn't say "see you in the morning," I'd worried that I'd die in the night, because you'd always hear people say, "Oh, it's okay, they'd die in your sleep." So me as a little kid took that very literally, and I thought I might die in my sleep unless my parents would say, "See you in the morning." So, there was a lot of anxiety and worry, but with this, there was also OCD. I know I'd make little superstitions up for myself that if I didn't do this particular thing, then something bad would happen. And usually it was around my family, because I think that was my sense of safety. And I'd really just want them to be happy and then I'd be happy. And it was a bit of a chaotic time and a bit dysfunctional, really, in my family at that time when I was growing up in my younger years. So I think really that was where I wanted everything to be fine and safe and everyone be happy. And I really would think and say to myself, if they're happy, I'll be happy. I sort of let go of any wants or likes of my own, and I just wanted everyone else to be happy. And if they were happy, then I'd be happy. So this really sort of set the stage for what was to come later in life. And I did experience a lot of anxiety into my teens, and with that came control issues, disordered eating, OCD. If I didn't do this, then something bad might happen. And that continued. And I remember getting my first full-time job. I was always really into acting, and I got a small ongoing part on New Zealand's favourite soap opera, which was on primetime TV, called Shortland Street. And it was a really small role as the coffee shop assistant, but I sort of had to be there all the time. So basically, most of the time, it's like a featured extra. But I had to be available for whenever they were filming the coffee shop scenes. So it meant that I had to have a reasonably flexible work life around that. So my acting agent actually asked me if I wanted to work for them, helping with the casting and calling people up. A lot of the time, actually, I'd be casting other extras to be on the show as well. And I was able to pick which people I wanted to sit in the coffee shop scenes while I was there serving. So it was really fun, but it was my first full-time job, and it was an office job in this tiny little office. And the other people I was working with, the owner of the business and his partner, they were absolute chain smokers, the stress. They'd just be smoking all the time, and it was a little office with no windows open most of the time. And I'd be breathing in this smoke. I'd go home feeling sick. And there was a bit of emotional manipulation as well. So me and a few of the other people who worked there would all be looking at us at each other, oh, who's going to leave first at the end of the day? Because we'd feel like we were going to be frowned on. 5 o'clock rolled around, and we all sort of felt like we should be there longer and putting in the hard yards. So as soon as one person left, we'd be like, oh, okay, it's all right to go now. So there was quite a lot of pressure. I mean, I was about 18 at this time, and I really did feel the pressure, and I wanted to do well and really give my all. And I really did give my all. And after probably about 6 months of this, I started to burn out quite badly. It was really long hours, and it was quite a lot of pressure, in these sort of industries. It's all about getting things done now. The casting agents would ring up and say, gather up this many people and send them out to me for an audition. And so would be scrambling about and getting the people off for an audition and trying to manage people like that. And sometimes people wouldn't show up, and that would reflect badly on us. So there was quite a lot of pressure, and I really burnt out, after about 6 months, probably 6 to 8 months. I just had it, and I said, look, I really can't do this anymore. It's too much for me. And they said, look, just take some time off and just come in whatever capacity you want. Just come in whenever you want, just come in for half a day if you want, here and there. You manage your own hours. We'd rather have you in some capacity than not at all. So that was great. So I could really manage my own time, and that made a huge difference to me. And after a little while of that, I really rebuilt and felt a lot better. And then I got offered a full-time job on set on Xena Warrior Princess. It was a TV show which was being filmed in my city, and I was offered the job as the body double and stand-in of one of the main actors, who was just my size. And it was a great opportunity, and it was much better money, also much more hours, but it was much better money. So I took it, and from whatever the 45, 50-hour weeks I was doing before, now it zoomed to 60 plus hour weeks. And a lot of that time was on set, and just a lot of it was waiting around. For those of you who have worked in film, there's a lot of sitting around. So it was actually okay. They were really long hours, but a lot of the time it just required me to be there and, just be close by, but I could be doing my own thing. So that worked pretty well for me, and I did 3 years doing that. And every year would have about 3 months off where we could go and travel, which sort of liaised with the northern summer, which was our winter in New Zealand. So that worked out really well, and I'd travel, and my grandparents lived in the US, so I'd go and visit them and go and do some traveling during that time. So I did 3 years of that, and it did take its toll. It was a lot of hours, and I'd find on a Sunday afternoon, if someone unexpectedly came in to visit, I'd get sort of quite resentful, and I'd be like, oh, I need this time. I have to do my laundry and need some time to myself. I wouldn't probably say that to them, but I just feel it on the inside because the time to myself was so precious because I was spending so much of it at work. So that was probably a bit of a sign that it wasn't the most balanced lifestyle. But it was good for a while. Then after about 3 years, I did 3 seasons of it, and I'd had enough. And so I didn't renew my contract for that fourth season. And instead, I decided to go to India to travel. And I had an opportunity there to live in an ashram and to do some work there. So I took the opportunity to spend that time and go to India. And that was really great. I had an amazing time. But after about 6 months, something in me really started to just get very low, and my energy was really low. I was losing a lot of weight. And I went to see an Ayurvedic doctor in India, and he said, yeah, you have chronic fatigue syndrome, and you really need to take time to rest and sort of rebuild yourself. And so I took that in mind and took it easy. And then a few months later, my mother came to visit, and she took one look at me, and I was about 38 kilos or something. I was really thin. I kept losing weight, even though I was eating, and I really didn't know what was going on. And she said, look, why don't you just come home and recover and, take some time to get better? And that's really what I needed to hear to help me let go of my mindset. No, I have to finish this time. I've committed to a year. I need to stay for a year. So having my mother come and say, look, you're really not well, you need to come home and just get better, was really letting me off the hook. And so I wound up my time there, and I returned to New Zealand and stayed with them for about a year and a half, just recovering and getting better. And I found out I had amoebic dysentery, which is why I had the extreme weight loss. By the time I got home, I was about 35 kilos, and usually I'm about 50. So, it was a lot of weight to lose. I had no reserves. And if you hear my mother talking about it, should tell you that I was nearly dead, and I felt great on the inside, like I was feeling happy after having all this time in this amazing spiritual environment. But yeah, my body was pretty shot. And while I didn't know it at the time, I didn't really know anything about nervous system regulation or any of that. I don't know how I didn't know about it, but it just wasn't part of my vocabulary. And I realize now that I had a severely dysregulated nervous system, and it was really stuck at that point that I had no energy. My resources were totally gone, and I couldn't really do anything except just nurture myself. It was almost like a rebirth where I was sort of like an infant again, and really had to just build myself up, feeding myself nourishing foods, having time in nature, going for really gentle walks, and just making sure I didn't overdo it. And, a lot of these things all came quite intuitively. I did a lot of yoga, meditation. I spent a lot of time in nature and journaling and just in the sunshine, just really nurturing myself. And these are all amazing nervous system regulation tools that I use now in my daily practices. But it all came quite intuitively, and this is really how I healed. I got better, and it did take me about a year and a half before I was fully strong and ready to go again. And healing was really my full-time job. I couldn't work at that time, and Yeah, it was an interesting time, but it was really valuable when I look back on it. It was really a time of rebirth, but it was also reparenting as well. I sort of needed that time, I think, with my parents, where they were really just focusing on me and giving me what I needed. And that really made up for a lot of time lost, I think, when I was a child and there was a lot of dysfunction going on. And it was a time they were focusing on a lot of things of their own, and I probably didn't get the emotional attention that I needed at that time. So really everything is perfect, and that really set me up to then be able to go off and live my life. And ultimately I did. I moved to another city after that and did my own thing. But it was a really precious time. But I remember so clearly the absolute frustration of being in that time. At some points, friends would ask me to go out with them, and I really just didn't have the energy to do what normal, 20 something year old people do and go out and hang out with their friends. I really didn't have the energy to do that. So it was a really quite, incubated time in my life. So that was in my mid 20s, really, was when all that happened with the chronic fatigue. And after healing from that, I haven't really had too much of an issue with my energy levels. I think part of it is now I know how to stop myself from getting into that really extreme, stuck pattern of dysregulation. But I've still struggled a lot with anxiety and also OCD. A really bad period of OCD was when I was pregnant with my daughter 14 years ago. And a year prior to that, I'd experienced a miscarriage. And that was really devastating to me because I was so excited to have a child. And then I found out just in the ultrasound that the heart wasn't beating. And it really did spur on PTSD. And yeah, it did bring up trauma for me. So then for the next 9 months, once I did fall pregnant again, I was really highly strung and worried. And I did experience a lot of OCD because I was worried, what if this happens? What if that happens? What if I get sick and then I lose the baby? So that was quite an extreme time. So it comes and goes at different periods of our life, I think. But I'm so grateful now that I actually understand so much more about anxiety and why I experience it. I mean, there will be triggers which come up, but I know how to manage it. And recently I had my 50th birthday and I decided to go back to my hometown where my parents lived and have a big party with friends and family friends. And in the week leading up to that, I got so much anxiety. I had a really anxious stomach, so I couldn't eat very well and just stressing out really about would it be good enough and what if no one came and what if there wasn't enough food or drinks and just all manner of worrying. And I was quite busy at the time. It was leading up to Christmas as well. So I had skipped some of my basic daily practices of a little bit of yoga, a little bit of meditation, a little bit of journaling, these things which really just keep me feeling regulated and healthy. And suddenly I'd realize, oh, I skipped that. And I'd go back and do it. And it was amazing to me just to see the difference. So even though I've been doing these things for so long, these daily practices, when I skip them, it makes a big difference. And so just keeping with them, and sometimes I can't always do it at the same time or for quite as long, but just slipping it in, just even a couple of minutes of meditation a day, just closing my eyes, even when I get home in my car, just closing my eyes for a few minutes. Then I transition and go into the house. That can really make a difference. So it's just having these little tools to be able to pull out when you need it and to just have a basic routine that you do practice every day just to keep yourself feeling healthy and well. So I really just wanted to share this because I know that anxiety is a huge thing for so many people, and some of my family members experience it as well. Um, and I just want you to know, if you do experience anxiety or OCD, or have had a dysregulated nervous system in one way or another with burnout and chronic fatigue, exhaustion, you're not alone, and there really is a way out. I don't believe that you can fully eradicate anxiety, but you definitely can manage it, and just to work with it and see the cues, and just stop it from taking over your life. So this is something of great interest to me. I've made a mini course called Thrive with Self-Worth, which really talks about all this: managing anxiety, stopping self-sabotage, because that's also quite a big part of it as well. And if you'd like to sign up for that, I'll leave a link in the show notes below. And know that you're not alone, and please connect and share your stories of anxiety or OCD or any of these things, because I'd love to hear and to support you in whatever way I can. Thank you so much for listening. If there's anyone who you think might benefit from this episode, please share it with them, and consider subscribing to the podcast. That way you'll never miss any episodes. Thanks so much for joining me. See you next time.